Allow me at the outset a very brief advertising for the Diplomatic Academy. We have 3 master programs. Our most important one, the Master of Advanced International Studies, but we also have a Master of Science in Environmental Technology and Digital International Affairs. We have a PhD program, a diploma. I would like you to ask you to spread the word about our institution, which, by the way, is 271 years old, founded in 1754 by Maria Theresia, and always had the motto of educating the next generation of leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, we are celebrating this year 30 years of Austrian EU membership. And when we look back to the years prior to our membership application in 1989, we see that the decision at the time, also for Austria, was not an easy one. Remember that the application for EU membership came before the fall of the Iron Curtain in July of 1989. And I was part of a delegation accompanying our Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister Alois Mock in 1988. We were still in the times of the Cold War, explaining to the Soviet Union at the time why Austria would like to join the European communities. And it was interesting that Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze at the time said, well, given the dawn that we are living through, we could imagine that by the mid-90s, Austria could become a member of the European Union. And lo and behold, it was the 1st of January 1995 that we joined the European Union. And as you know, after the demise of communism and the fall of the Soviet Union, it was also Sweden, Finland, and at the time also Norway, who wanted to originally to join the European Union. Norway, as you know, did have a negative referendum on membership, so it was eventually Austria, Sweden, and Finland who joined on the 1st of January 1995. It was certainly also not an easy decision for Austria because there was quite some resistance in the Austrian governing parties, a coalition of 2 parties. Topics were agriculture, transit, but also land ownership. Chancellor Schüssel, who will later also come, could speak at length about the membership negotiations. Eventually, we had this great bipartisan effort for a referendum, where we hit precisely the 2/3 mark with 66.6% in favor of our membership. And when we compare our accession process to the ongoing enlargement negotiations, then of course we had a big advantage because we had already adjusted and adapted to the rules of the common market, which, as you know, was founded in 1992 before we joined the European Union. Overall, to sum up, Austria has benefited tremendously from the membership in the European Union over the last 30 years, economically, politically, from the free movement of persons, goods, capitals, and services to a higher investment volume, from the participation in the decision-making in the CFSP to cooperation in research and much more. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of today is Europe's new responsibility. The European Union was always a project of vision. The founders of the European project reacted to the horrible experiences of World War II, and they developed a vision for a united Europe, a Europe of peace, prosperity, and cooperation. When we discuss today Europe's new responsibilities, we should not stop short of taking this vision for Europe even further. Alois Mock, who I mentioned before, once said that the European Union has seen times of standstill and times of great progress in European integration, but it has never receded. Well, he clearly at the time did not expect Brexit to happen, but it holds true for ups and downs in the integration process. The European Union has to face major challenges: security issues, climate change, lack of competitiveness, an aging society, and many more that will certainly be discussed today. But we should not allow our vision to falter. Have we not overcome so many crises? The worst pandemic since the 1920s, the worst energy shock since the 1970s, and have we not found a not expected but unified response to the Russian war of aggression, the first war on European soil since the 1990s? we will not be able to relive the enthusiasm about freedom and the borderless Europe in the Annus Mirabilis of 1989. And we cannot avoid that so many accomplishments of the European Union are being taken for granted. But we need to continue to stick to the vision of the founding fathers of European integration, taking European security in our own hands, enlarging the Union, completing the common market, regaining competitiveness, and most importantly, secure our democracies. We will sometimes need to progress with small steps, but we should not lose sight of our big goal. Alain Berset, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, was here last week and presented his New Deal on European security. We need to promote European values and our vision for Europe. A Europe of democracy, freedom, rule of law and human rights. This is what I see as Europe's new responsibility. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you this morning. I like to be honest, and I was pretty skeptic at the first moment when we said, okay, we should start already at 9 o'clock because otherwise the time for our program will become too short. But you surprised me. Thank you for getting up so early in order to come here and to attend this event. And I certainly just want to say a few words what we try to offer you today, and maybe also a few words, well, to the topic of today, Europe's new responsibility. The first thing is, you know, that, what you can expect in this day is something, of course, that will not be interesting, but probably cannot offer you a clear solution. Why? Because Europe is in a situation where the whole political process is going on, by far not at the end. In many respects, we are only at the beginning. And at the same time, we are confronted with the biggest challenge we had since the end of the Cold War. The question of the war in Ukraine, we had already last night a discussion about it with Colonel Reisner, who gave us deep insights into details and also future perspectives. And therefore, we will start also in the first part with European defense. It will be our Secretary General who will start, Secretary General of our Ministry of Defense. When I hesitate, this is not just by chance, but just a few years ago, he organized this event over here. He was the Secretary General of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and therefore he also has the chance to open this by his speech. And afterwards, he shall not tell us only about well, his experiences, immediate experiences out of his job as the highest representative of the Ministry of Defense immediately underneath our defense minister. And then we will continue, you know, and try to look into the future. What is going on now with this war in Ukraine? And we will have the chance that, the president of probably the most influential think tank in Europe in this period will give us some impressions what will be happening here. This is Mikuláš Dzurinda, who also used to be the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and some other ministers in our neighboring country. But he is now the president of Wilfried Martens Institute, which is not only ranking very much at the top of the worldwide ranking list of think tanks, but he also set the priority for defense because he realized why this is necessary. Just had a few days ago the opportunity to spend more than a day with the first defense commissioner, Kubilius, in Brussels, together with him and the group. Okay, and then we go further on. Strong personalities. Our former Chancellor, Schüssel, will give us a lecture about his experiences. He probably was the strongest chancellor Austria had in the Second Republic. Besides all names, I do not know any other person who really was involved himself into all the matters and affairs in every single ministry. He directed the government in a way that nobody before him or afterwards could do. Okay, and he also had quite some experiences in Europe, and therefore we are looking forward also what he will present us. And then we will have the opportunity also to meet another outstanding personality of European, let me say even worldwide politics. This is Viktor Yushchenko. He started his career, of course, still in the old Soviet Union. He became then, after independence, the first president or director of the National Bank, so he has a sound economic background. And then he became prime minister and afterwards president. In the most interesting and important period of the country when there was the Orange Revolution. The first time that Ukraine really was challenged. And he had this almost impossible job to go through this period and secure also the independence of this country. We're looking forward in this period where we have news, you know, that the military situation is not and will not be easy for the country in the coming periods. And then, of course, we will also have a short break. Then one lady that started a diplomatic career in Austria, that became state secretary, foreign minister, and foreign minister in one of the most difficult periods for Austria, because just 5 years after we had joined EU, we got sanctions from this organization. And this was a very tough period. She was famous for her battle smile, as they called it, you know. And she did it in a way that just a few years thereafter, she even became the European foreign minister, the high representative, and also for the neighborhood. Benita Ferrero-Waldner. Great pleasure for me to have you here. Yeah, and then, of course, we will not only listen to her, but we wanted also to have some reports what is going on in other regions within Europe. This is not a continent that is uniform in any way, and therefore we will have the chance to listen to Richard Bruton, famous or significant former minister of Ireland. And of course, this also will be interesting for us because Ireland is a neutral country and is discussing neutrality and whether this, what should be the future in the, of this institution for in the coming years and so on. Okay. And we also have the chance to meet a former minister, Ukrainian minister for foreign affairs, who had some special relations also with Austria because he served in our country for some years as the ambassador. And insofar, yeah, The name is Volodymyr Ogrysko. He now is also the chief of the think tank, so we want to combine, practitioners with think tankers. And we also will have the opportunity to listen to just a few remarks of the president of the Atlantic Treaty Association, Theodosius Georgiou. He comes from Greece, but today he will not be in this function, but just in the function of this organization. And then we will go to the last panel, and in the last panel we will try to discuss very seriously where do we stand, what are real possibilities for Europe to develop furthermore in the field of security and defense policy. And we engaged a few very prominent people. On the one hand, we have Stefan Mayer. He is the director of the most prominent German think tank, SWP, Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politics. And he also has a background, for the neighborhood, because he worked quite a bit also in Africa and another. I do not talk too much about it. But he will try to explain us the German position and the possibilities that he sees for the future development. And next to him, we engaged Guillaume Lasconjaria. He's the Director of Studies and Research in l'Institut des Hautes Études de Défense Nationale in Paris, which means that he is responsible now in the National Defense University in Paris for the whole sector of research. And in addition, we will have Federico Fabbrini, an Italian, because of course also Italy will play a role in this big game. Federico Fabbrini, who now is working in Dublin as a law professor. He is sitting over here. And last but not least, there will be a lady in a new function. For the first time also, NATO opened a liaison office to OSCE, because OSCE maybe will have some function, further function in the future. Nobody knows, but it certainly will be very important to stand by. And insofar, we will have a big program. I only can tell you what I can promise. It will stay interesting all the time. And at the end, you will not have to leave completely hungry this place, but we're also prepared at least a small lunch for everybody, so that, after being fed heavily by ideas and analysis, that you also can survive physically. Okay, this will be the program that I wanted, overall program that I wanted to present. Okay, just a few words to our situation now. Europe certainly is in the most serious situation since the end of the Cold War, as I mentioned already. Why? Because for the first time, it is really challenged, not only in security policy, but militarily. And the question whether we are prepared, you can answer easily. No, we are not prepared. We are still in a situation that we have 27 members with 27 different security and military, not only politics, but also institutions and systems, and by far more in armament, everything. And for the first time, we realized that when you want to fight the war, when you not even to fight it immediately, but to help a state that is challenged like Ukraine. It is not easy just to spend them armament, because they cannot operate 10 different systems of tanks or whatever. And they do not have the possibility to store and also to use different ammunition that does not fit in other systems, and so on. And insofar, we are really challenged. Europe still is underestimating this question heavily. And at the same time, we're also in the situation that in security policy, if we ask, where does Europe stand? I had the opportunity just last week to visit Syria and get very many impressions. Just a week before, I was in eastern Turkey and also had the perspective, what is going on over the region. And whenever I ask myself, where is Europe? Where is Europe in the Caucasian region? Where is it in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon? Where is it in the whole Middle East, in Northern Africa? I do not find many concrete answers. And therefore, we'll try to do some. Okay. Now I think it has become the time to end my words. It's a pleasure for me to greet you all, to welcome you all, former ministers like Friedhelm Frischenschlager, and now especially also our former Chancellor, Wolfgang Schüssel. He just came here. Thank you very much for your coming. We really were looking forward. And therefore, I now want to stop and go immediately into the program, because we will try even to be a little bit faster, if possible, in order not to be too late. Insofar, I really want to welcome all our speakers, all our participants, all our discussions. You will have, especially in the second part of this event, the possibility also to not only ask questions, maybe to discuss with our speakers. Therefore, it should be not only presentations, but also a lively process, at least in the second half. And insofar, once more, I want really to welcome you heartily. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this event today. I want to thank also Martin Eichtinger as the director of Diplomatic Academy for this excellent cooperation. And I'm sure this will not be the last event that we will organize together, looking into the future. Therefore, thank you very much, everybody who has contributed to this event. And now we start immediately with the first panel. And therefore, I hand over to the director of our institution, Michael Zinkanell, who will moderate the first part of it. Please, Michael.
Dear President, Excellencies, dear former ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure also to welcome you to this 29th European Forum that is organized by the AIS and our partners, that is under the theme Europe's New Responsibility. And as Dr. Fasslabend pointed out, I have the great honor to introduce our first set of keynote speakers. And therefore, without any further ado, please allow me to welcome the Secretary General of the Austrian Federal Ministry of Defense, Arnold Kammel, who was also, as it has been briefly pointed out, the former director of the AIS. Dear Arnold, it's my great pleasure to welcome you. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, dear director, dear Michael, dear Mr. President, dear Werner, dear Mr. Director, dear Martin, former presidents, chancellors, prime ministers, members of the European Commission, ministers, excellencies, officers, ladies and gentlemen. I made it. It's really a true pleasure and honor to be here, and let me start by conveying the best regards of my minister, Claudia Tanner, who unfortunately is unable to be here with you today due to other commitments, but nonetheless, it's a true privilege for me to stand in front of you. And dear Werner, I must admit it somewhat feels strange that having organized roughly, last year it would have been even perfect, 50% of the European fora alongside with you in the last decades, and now standing in front of you here, it really feels quite strange, I must admit, but nonetheless I will do my best to cope with the challenge and to look into the area of European defense, challenges and also priorities and programs. Ladies and gentlemen, since we are here at the Diplomatic Academy, let me start by quoting a book. The ones that have listened to me more often might think, yeah, again he's coming up with the same old story, but I do believe that this is necessary for setting the stage and preparing you for what lies ahead of us in terms of European security and defense. And the book is the famous Robert Kagan book of the Return of History and the End of Dreams, published in the year 2008. At the time when the Russian Federation started its action in Georgia, if you think about South Ossetia, if you think about Abkhazia, and Robert Kagan perfectly described that, in fact, the liberal world order that we, especially in Europe, have been benefiting of and have always contributed to, will be challenged by other actors that will carry out interest-based international politics, international-based relations in that regard. However, and not going too much into the book, for me, the second part of the title is even more important, The End of Dreams. And Werner mentioned that we met here very early in the morning, but not just on today's occasion. I think we have to self-critically ask ourselves, are we already awake? Or are we still dreaming of a world that might look totally different once we are waking up and once we are looking into this kind of current developments that we are confronted with? And again, this is also perfectly illustrated by the most important strategic documents of the European Union. Former Chancellor Schüssel will remember that in 2003, the European Council adopted the first ever European security strategy. The first sentence of this European security strategy reads as follows: Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. The face of violence of the first half of the decade of the 20th century has given way to an unprecedented period of peace and stability on the European continent. If we jump into this time and look to the year 2025, when at the beginning of the year, the European Commission and the Commission President published its white paper on European defense, Defense Readiness 2030, the first sentence of the document reads as follows: Europe faces an acute and growing threat, and in order to mitigate the challenges that we are confronted with, we must be able to deter, and we must be ready to also defend or what we have been building up over this kind of decades as a consequence of European integration. Ladies and gentlemen, those two quotations clearly indicate the dramatic change of the overall situation and also to a certain extent the dilemma that we as Europeans are confronted with. And Werner has pointed it out in his opening remarks. Definitely, after the outbreak and the invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine on 24th of February 2022, we have seen a new momentum for European defense. One could say, again, we had it already back in 2013 when we had the European Council, so the meeting of the heads of states and government with the shortest title ever, because in 2013, December 2013, the title of the European Council was Defense Matters. Now, 12 years later on, we might realize, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, we have to concentrate on European defense, and we do not have that many chances of really properly implementing our common security and defense policy in the European Union. So this new momentum that was triggered by the Russian invasion in Ukraine has led to some kind of significant changes also in the context of the European Union and its common security and defense policy. We do not only have a new institutional setup with a High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Vice President of the Commission, that is coming from a Baltic country and having a clear focus of the challenges that we are coping with. We also have a commissioner in charge of defense / industry that should help in ramping up the industrial and technological base of Europe in matters of defense. And we have also seen over the last couple of years a variety of documents, doctrinal approaches, regulations that should help in fostering European defense. 2022, the strategic compass, highlighting the need for having a higher degree of resilience for the EU and its member states. In 2025, as I have already mentioned, the European White Paper on Defense, making Europe ready to avoid, so to say, any future war. We have seen several regulations, directives, omnibus packages. One can hardly follow, even in the ministry, with the speed of light, where we see these developments in the area of security and defense policy. So certain ingredients for making European defense policy work are already there. However, we should not lean back. And however, we should not fall into the same trap as maybe in all the decades before. It is about the implementation. All these documents, all these doctrinal papers that we can all agree, and when the sun is shining, we might sit out there, read those papers and say, yes, right, Europe needs to do its homework, Europe and its member states need to invest in security and defense. We need to implement them because none of those papers is directly producing any kind of capabilities, nor is it in the very end leading to a commitment by the European member states to properly use these kind of capabilities and to have the commitment of having, so to say, a leading role also for the European Union at the international stage. So what we have to do is to properly assess the situation. The President has made a very important point. Yes, despite the difficult geopolitical environment, despite all these kind of ingredients, we still see a highly fragmented defense industrial base in Europe. We are still thinking and having and sharing the perspective of 27 member states instead of having a more unified European one. We are still having, if you look to the treaties, the famous Article 346, Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, that is especially pointing at the aspect of defense procurement from a European Union perspective and exempting defense procurement of the overall provisions related to the internal market rules of the European Union. We need to overcome this kind of fragmentation. We need to overcome this kind of divide in Europe. And yes, we also need to create our European capabilities in that regard. If I look from an Austrian perspective, we have seen a quite steady increase of our defense budgets. This year, we are roughly at 4.7 billion euros. Next year, for the first time, we will manage, thanks also to the great negotiation efforts of my minister, to surpass the 5 billion threshold with regard to our national defense budget. However, if I look of how to spend in an intelligent, in a European manner, this money, it's not so easy. Because if we look at the defense industrial base, we still see that national interests prevail and that we have not set up this kind of basis of creating a strong European defense industrial base. A month ago, the European Defense Investment Program, EDIP, was launched that should help in fostering the joint development, both in terms of technology and then with regard to the real capabilities to have this kind of strong defense industrial base for Europe. Yes, we have to overcome debates, and I'm on purpose not looking to Germany in that regard, of who is having which kind of share when it comes to joint procurements. For a small and medium-sized country such as Austria, it's essential that we do not have to assess 20 different types of capabilities, but that we have also from an interoperability perspective 2 or 3 European products on which we can rely, that we can use in joint endeavors with our European partners, and that we do not necessarily have to look beyond the European continent to our transatlantic partners. I think we have to foster and speed up the development of this defense industrial base. Therefore, it's not that much of a surprise that especially the European Commission has taken over quite a leading role in shaping the future of European security and defense policy. We see that via the internal market, the European Commission tries to push for setting up this defense industrial base, which is to a certain extent quite interesting as we are moving from the purely intergovernmental and on consensus-based principle of common foreign and security policy more and more, slowly but surely, into the direction of a more supranational, qualified majority-based security and defense policy in the European Union. I think we have to listen carefully to all these kind of signals. Werner has perfectly described all the challenges that Europe is confronted with. And we can change many things, but we cannot change the geography, and we have to deal with the security environment, and we have to find proper responses as the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, if we look at the speed with which decisions have been made at the political level over the last 3.5 years after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, there's a certain kind of hope that finally we realize that defense matters. On the other hand, we should not purely take into our consideration that it's the paperwork that we have already properly done. It's again about the implementation, and it's again about the will to make use and to debate also the role of Europe in this changing geopolitical environment. I would therefore see 3 important things that would be necessary from my point of view to shape further this security and defense debate in Europe. First of all, I think we cannot any longer hide away of having a real strategic debate of which role Europe wants to play in this kind of more contested international environment, which kind of commitments are needed to then cope with this role and deliver on our promises. We are very often, having participated together with my minister the last 6 years in all the defense ministerials, we are very often looking at nitty-gritty, tiny details. I think the time is necessary that we start this kind of strategic debate where we stand and where the future for Europe should be in this kind of international environment. Second thing, we have really to foster and to set up this defense industrial base. And this does not necessarily start with tanks, fighter jets or whatsoever, but it's already the technology and the technological and research base that is needed in Europe. The European cloud, the European artificial intelligence, European quantum, whatever areas where we have an expertise, but we need to pool this kind of expertise to be also ready to stand the challenges at the international scene. And the third thing, and maybe the most important one, but the hardest one to achieve. Yes, we are all agreeing that we need to foster our resilience. Yes, we will all agree that we need to stand ready. The old Latin saying of si vis pacem para bellum, as also the Commission President pointed it out, if Europe wants to avoid a war, we need to stand ready to deter also this kind of aggression. This requires a totally changed mental preparedness, not just of the political leadership, but also of the citizens and the population of Europe. We have been benefiting from the peace dividend over many decades. Maybe we have lost somewhat the perspective that peace and stability is not a gift and is neither given, but we have on a daily basis to invest on that. So let us therefore jointly work together to really implement that European defense matters. And if you're doing it by 27 together instead of 27 separate, I might in the end also have a hope that Europe also in the future will continue to play an important role as a credible international actor. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Kammel, dear Arnold, for these very precise words, for your great assessment, and also for reminding us that it is up to us to decide how we are going to wake up from the stage that you described in the very beginning, the stage where we probably still half asleep, and that more political will is needed for implementing these actions from the theory into practice. The next gentleman that I'd like to invite to the stage is an outstanding political figure in Slovakia, Mikuláš Dzurinda, the former Prime Minister of Slovakia and now the president of the Wilfried Martens Center. As long as I can remember, we've organized the European Forum never without you, so you're an integral part also of this forum. Thank you very much, dear Mikuláš, for being with us, and thanks to the Wilfried Martens Center for also supporting this European Forum. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Dear President, dear Martin, dear President, dear Werner, dear friends, it is always a privilege to be in Vienna, and especially in this historical house. I'd like to thank both friends, Werner and Martin, for good cooperation, which helped to prepare this traditional annual event. I greet you all, but especially three personalities, because of different reasons. Wolfgang, it is always fantastic to see you in a good shape, with beautiful hair. Viktor Yushchenko, President Yushchenko, welcome to our part of Europe, and Benita. We remember a lot from European summits and from the past. So, dear friends, let's begin by considering how the world has been changed over the past year. The war of Russia against Ukraine continues, and it continues with undiminished brutality, showing no signs of ending or of any ceasefire. Despite immense effort and significant losses, Russia failed to achieve any breakthrough in Ukraine over the past year. This failure led Russia to gradually shift its approach from a war of attrition against Ukraine to a hybrid war against Europe. We've been confronted with sabotage operations in the Baltic Sea and at our airports, as well as drones violating our territory and threatening our citizens. This is coupled with a flood of massive disinformation and propaganda. Another factor is the United States. The US president hits a brick wall when wanting to end the war of Russia against Ukraine. First, when he tried to break and force into surrender the Ukrainian president in the White House. Let's recall his call. Stop fighting. You have no card, Mr. President Zelensky. It was brutal, isn't it? The second, he hit a brick wall with Putin, whom he wanted to charm in Alaska. Today it is clear that the MAGA approach will not bring sustainable peace in Ukraine. The internal climate in the United States is also a new phenomenon, as the country is now deeply polarized and inward-looking. Transatlantic values have been replaced by isolationism and a policy of power projection. The United States applies this power in all directions globally, even against its own allies, including the United States. It is not just a critic. This is a good moment to realize that we should rely much more on ourselves than in the past. The main beneficiary of the chaos that Russia's war against Ukraine, as well as the MAGA movement, have plunged the world into is China. China is massively profiting from this new situation, which is why it supports Russia not ostentatiously, but purposefully, through the purchase of raw materials, but also militarily. China is gaining increasing geopolitical power, without any doubt. We all remember the pictures from Beijing just a few weeks ago, when half the world demonstrated loyalty to the Chinese leadership. So, dear friends, the key question from our perspective is, how the EU reacted to this development? We met here a year ago on November the 7th, no, the 8th. A few weeks later, on November the 27th, the new European Commission, which emerged from the European Parliament elections, was appointed. For the first time, a Commissioner for Defense and Space was established. Immediately following his appointment, the Commissioner Andrius Kubilius invited us, the Martens Center, to collaborate on the creation of the white paper for the defense and security. You, Werner, mentioned our cooperation with Andrius Kubilius. Kubilius did so because he was familiar with our project on the Defense Union, which I also presented in broad strokes here at the last year's conference. Our cooperation was reflected in the document, the very recent one, Preserving Peace, Defense Readiness Roadmap 2030, which the European Commission submitted to the European Council and which the Council approved last month during its meeting, just a few weeks ago. So, dear friends, if the pyramid is at our disposal, yeah, thank you very much. If we compare the context of this defense pyramid with the document which has been mentioned a while ago, with the Defense Readiness Roadmap 2030, we find that we are collectively operating in the lower part of the pyramid. By other words, the lower part of the pyramid is already on the paper, not implemented, but on the paper, and we are unified with the Commission in this respect. By adopting the roadmap, the European Council approved tasks that fulfill the requirements for revitalizing and building the defense industry. You mentioned several times this need, supplementing the necessary strategic capabilities, and fundamentally strengthening military mobility, another very, very important component. The document also contains tasks that, at least partially, touch upon innovation and modern technologies, including artificial intelligence, as well as civil protection of the population. European DARPA is not a reality yet, but in the document you can read or find a very strong emphasis on cutting-edge research and innovation, which is extremely needed, not only for defense, but also for dual use. What remains to be addressed, at least according to our vision in the Martens Center, are the highest floors, the highest level, this rouge and red floor of the defense pyramid. It means the creation of a European military model, the management of military operations, the necessary institutional reform, and finally, the nuclear component, or if you want, nuclear deterrence. Regarding institutional reform, we are proposing the establishment of a European Security Council, which would be composed of the prime ministers or heads of state of all participating countries participating in the Defense Union project. Why? Why we are coming with this? We are coming this to eliminate the weakness which has been mentioned several times by the Secretary General. We are champions on the documents, we are champions on proclamations, but we are not so big champions when it comes to implementation. If you read this very new, brand new document, this roadmap to 2030, you will find very complicated, bureaucratically challenging scheme how the process will be managed. Very briefly, the roadmap entrusts the coordination of the work to the European Defence Agency, which in cooperation with the EU military staff will prepare a coordinated annual review on defense every year. Based on this review, the Commission will submit the annual defense readiness report to the European Council every October. The Council will set out the tasks which will be monitored and evaluated throughout the year by the defense ministers of the member states in the Foreign Affairs Council format. And only then, once a year, the prime ministers will consider whether there is a progress or stagnation. We at the Martens Center, we strongly believe the proposed management is just inadequate. If European defense is a project of the highest priority, then this project should be intensively overseen by the chiefs of executive of all participating states continuously, not just once a year at the European Council. The draft of this European Security Council is already on the table, and we will publish this document by the end of this year with qualified majority vote. Complicated a bit, but I believe it is possible. It is not bureaucratic, because European Security Council will be or should be or could be a part of the European Council, which is already existing. Last October, we issued a publication, Why Europe Needs a Nuclear Deterrence. It is available on our webpage. We continue on our work on this defense component, which is, as everybody can realize, very sensitive, but I strongly believe also inevitable. We are working just as intensively on a model for European armed forces and the management of military operations. These are sensitive areas where we must take into account the positions of the member states as well as the interests of the EU as a whole. At the same time, we must recognize the existence of the Transatlantic Alliance, which consists not only of its member countries, but also of numerous high-quality professional management and command structures that do not need to be duplicated or replaced. Instead, they should be cleverly utilized, especially if the United States continues its MAGA approach. The core challenge for European defense is the coordination of member states so that the procurement of weapons and military equipment is carried out jointly. Werner, you mentioned that perfectly. We are 27, we have many, many different kinds of weapons, and compatibility of these weapons is very low. Joint procurement saves money, enables compatibility and thus interoperability, which is currently arguably the greatest weakness and obstacle to eventual common military operations. Equally alarming is the anachronism that turns defense into a symbol of statehood and national sovereignty. I am reading about that for decades. Yet both President Macron and Chancellor Merz have repeatedly stated that no single state can withstand current threats alone. Not to mention that clinging to sovereignty in the military domain contradicts the rational application of the principle of subsidiarity. This principle is very rational, and by the way, it is written also in the preamble of our European Constitution, of the Lisbon Treaty. The true hallmark, by my mind, of a nation's and state sovereignty is the culture. Culture, it means the specificities of our nations, different traditions, different customs. The symbol of national sovereignty, by my mind, is the national theater, opera, architecture, literature, poetry, prose, not fighter jets, tanks, or drones. Power and politics, by my mind, depend on culture, not the other way around. Dear friends, I think a lot of work still awaits us in this area. It is possible that the moment of truth will come over common defense. It is evident that the EU is going through a complex period characterized by the rise of extremism, especially the rise of the extreme right. The only effective way to counter this is to deliver results. Implementation, reforms, results. The EU needs an action, an activity that would unite people of goodwill and breathe new momentum, new motivation into our ranks. I am convinced that the common European defense, a European defense union, our security can be just such a catalyst. Therefore, it must be approached gradually, but increasingly from a European, communitarian, rather than a national perspective. Thank you.
Dear President Dzurinda, dear Mikuláš, thank you very much for your statement, for also representing the Wilfried Martens Center. We have a couple of minutes left. This is why it's my pleasure to ask both of you one very quick follow-up question based on the statements that you gave. I'll start with you, Arnold. You have mentioned those three elements that we should certainly develop further in the future: the strategic debate, the defense industrial base, but also the fact that deterrence starts in our heads and in our minds. I would very briefly like to ask you, from the perspective of the Austrian Ministry of Defense, what is Austria contributing to those elements?
Well, thank you very much. I think, and having Werner, so to say, in front of me, if you look to the first one, to the strategic debates, let us not underestimate the role that Austria has played in all those 2.5, 3 decades of the common security and defense policy. Werner, it was you organizing the first informal gathering of EU defense ministers in our first EU presidency. So I think it is in our key strategic interest as Austria to jointly shape the development of the common security and defense policy. It's our prime forum for action, and therefore we have this interest, and if we want the whole project to develop in a manner that fits our interests, I think we need to be very active. Also, if you look in terms of the Austrian participation in CSCP missions and operations, I think we have our share of solidarity. However, maybe, and fora like the European Forum might be good occasions on that, we seldomly talk about what we do in the context of the EU. And I think this is also one of the lessons learned, and I would also pair it with the third point on mental resilience, on mental preparedness. Let's talk about it. I very often have the feeling when we have these public debates, when we analyze world politics, the population stands ready to absorb this kind of change. However, they need to get this feeling that they are supported with their ideas, and therefore we should not shy away from having this kind of debates, how the future of common security and defense policy might look like. When it comes to the second point with regard to the defense industrial base, to technology per se, again, one of the key success stories for Austria. If you look at the share of Austrian projects, consortia, whatever in the different framework programs of the European Union, Horizon Europe, European Defense Fund, we are punching above our weight if you compare it to other EU member states. We are again not talking about the story. And this is why I do believe that we have to foster this kind of debates. We have to go out and we have also to talk to our citizens, to our population about the possibilities that also Europe brings to them. It was mentioned by both of you, Martin and Werner, we are celebrating 30 years of our membership to the European Union. Again, we have taken the EU for granted as Austrians, but we rarely really look into all the big things that Europe also has contributed to the overall performance of Austria. And therefore, I think it's really, and in that sense, Mikuláš, I think you made this very important point. Yes, we have the documents in place. Yes, we have proper ideas, but we should also communicate them. And we should not shy away, especially as you mentioned, maybe the political tendencies and shifts, if you look into our political arena, we should not shy away from confrontation. Yes, there might be people that might see it differently, but this should not hinder us in not engaging in this kind of debate and making a strong stance for the European Union and our participation.
Thank you very much. And in some regard, I believe that this gathering today is also a sign that we are contributing and shaping this debate altogether. So thanks again also for all the participants for joining today. Mikuláš, a very quick question also to you. I fully agree with your assessment that security and defense is the natural new integration step for the European Union, from a political, economic union to a more stronger union in the security and defense field. Would you say that it is possible to harmonize that also with the national sovereignty, without giving up too much of the national sovereignty of the member states to a supranational European level to facilitate the European security and defense in the way that you have outlined it?
Yes, from one side, I believe it is possible. But from the other side, for me, it is a question of must. From my side, it is a question of survival. I am a man of eternal optimism, but I consider the current situation and development very seriously. Look at the United States. We were dreaming for so many decades there is a big boss who will defend us in any case, if needed. But it is gone. It seems to me it is gone. Who else but we, ourselves? So this is one angle of the answer. The second angle is, look, I am tapping from my own experience. People shouted at me when we introduced flat tax, but after 4 or 5 years, we enjoyed 11% of growth. And all of a sudden, everybody was happy. People shouted at me when I invited first Hungarians to my first government. Can you imagine to have the representatives of the Hungarian minority in the Slovak government? People wanted to kill me. People shouted at me, you are Hungarian, you are not a patriot. We survived. I was re-elected despite that. So if you want to achieve something what is possible, you have to struggle for impossible. The motto of my life is, where is the will, there is the way. And this is the right time. I like this sentence. We should not be afraid of confrontation, positive confrontation. I am not calling for something which is egoistic for me or my family or my nation. I represent a small nation, but I strongly believe that there is only one future in a really reunited European Union. Why? Why we are afraid of each other? 80 years after the World War II. Is there still a lack of trust? Is there still a lack of mutual confidence? If it is, let's shut the door. But I am against shutting the door. I would rather pass the door.
Thank you very much. Certainly. Certainly in such difficult and challenging times, more courage for bold actions is needed. Thank you both for your elaborations and for supporting this forum, for speaking so clearly. I would like to hand over to our president, Dr. Werner Fasslabend, who is going to introduce the next set of panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.